everyone, Richard Cardland here. Welcome to an awesome day of FileMaker training. Today is going to be awesome as always. And so there's a lot going on, but today is on, basically the next 2 days are basically on FileMaker mayhem and how to kind of like deal with it. And so we're talking about corrupted files, things like that. So today we're talking about basically cloning a file, saving a compressed copy of the file. And really the conversation includes the recovery file as well. And so before we get into all this and bring our talented guest speaker in today, I want to do a little bit of low-hanging fruit. First off, today's broadcast is actually, let me flip myself over here again. Broadcast today is primarily for intermediate and senior level people. If you're beginning brand new FileMaker person, the stuff I might say to you might scare you. Please don't let it scare you. The FileMaker file is very robust, it's very reliable, but you have to treat it with dignity and respect. So you need to treat your FileMaker file well. You make backups of it. And like really today's broadcast is all about understanding how to treat a FileMaker file, how to treat it well. And then if you happen to beat it a little bit on the side, then how to deal with that, right? And so kind of an important conversation. I'm sure Nick is rolling his eyes here. So anyway, coming up on the upcoming broadcast schedule, the broadcast, all this channel, all the learning that goes on here, this is our live learning, LiveStream learning, but we do have on-demand courses, things like that. You can check out the upcoming schedule by going to fmtrain.tv, which is this website right here, which is really an amazing website, totally amazing, and it's actually powered by FileMaker, the bottom half of it here. And you can see the upcoming broadcast schedule, which is pretty awesome. And so we see that today is cloning and save a compressed copy, tomorrow's recovery. We'll probably talk about some of that today. We're going to mix both these days together, answer questions. If you have questions that don't get answered today, bring it back tomorrow. We'll answer those questions because I want you to learn how this works, because I found out that senior engineers could be experts in the FileMaker platform for 15 or 20 years. They've never dealt with this. And then literally it's like watching a pig on ice skates. This happened. Calvin is here with us today. I'm not picking on Calvin, but I'm going to pick on Calvin only from a generic standpoint. Calvin's a senior engineer. He's been certified for 1 million years, and he didn't know his from a hole in the ground when it came to recovery, damaged files, things like that, because he is so good about taking care of the file that he'd never had the problem, right? And so a customer does something, causes a problem, and so then he's like running around in a panic, and he comes to me, and then I took care of it in 2 seconds, but he just didn't have the experience. And the only way you get the experience is by suffering through it or by listening to someone like me. So either you can listen to this broadcast or watch the recording, or you can suffer yourself and then learn what I'm about to teach you. So it's a question, do you want to learn through teaching, or do you want to learn by burning your finger on the stove? I have engineers who have to burn their fingers on the stove before they learn. So cool. So let's talk about today's broadcast a little bit. We do have Nick Hunter here who's kind of patrolling in the background, but I think more about this topic than he actually does, which is pretty awesome. So we'll start off. Calvin, if you want to go and mute yourself, you can just kind of feel free to chime in. But the bottom line is that if you treat FileMaker files really well, you don't crash them. If you're using it, like for example, if I'm using a local copy of FileMaker Pro right here, and I'm running it, and then my computer crashes, I should not use this file, I should go to a backup. And people go, well, how do you do a backup when it didn't make a backup? Because I don't work on files, local files. I work on files on my FileMaker server. I could have the FileMaker server in my office maybe, but I have a FileMaker server, and it makes backups for me every 15 minutes. So if my client crashes, the server's still running, that doesn't count as a crash. The server's still running. FileMaker server is able to gracefully deal with people who disconnect, right? If you disconnect, people are on the internet, they disconnect all the time. That is effectively kind of like a crash, except that the FileMaker server sees what happens and it's taking care of the file for you. It's babysitting the file. It's a happy file, right? So let's pretend like this is our FileMaker file. Okay, this is our FileMaker file. This is Clarice, our FileMaker file. And so we have to protect Clarice from all the bad things that are out there. And so if it's on a FileMaker server and someone's talking to it and then they die, go away, they explode, they get disconnected, their internet goes down, Clarice is protected by the FileMaker server, right? We understand this, very important. Now, if we're taking Clarice and we're just running her over here on our computer and suddenly the computer crashes, then Clarice is dead, right? That's Clarice. That's Clit. And the problem is if you kill Clarice enough times, she won't open for you anytime. So what you do is you quit FileMaker, you reopen FileMaker, Clarice comes back up, and you're like, wow, that's awesome. She still works, but she might be slightly damaged. And then if you crash her again, reopen her, crash her again, reopen. Eventually, she just doesn't reopen at all. She's just dead. Okay, does that all make sense? Anyone have any questions about that? No questions. Awesome. We haven't lost anyone yet. So what ends up happening here is that if you abuse a file, you crash it, reopen it, crash it, reopen it, crash it, reopen, eventually it won't open at all. You get a dialog that says a file cannot be reopened. That's basically a very stressful event. You don't want to be that person in that situation. You want FileMaker to always open, be reliable, not have any weird issues. So Calvin, you ran into an issue the other day, yes? Tell us about what happened to you. Why did you have a dead Clarice? Clarice was hanging. She was not very happy. She was dead. So what happens with that? How did that come about for you?
So for me, I was working on this file, and it was just behaving strangely, and it was running really slow. So I thought I'd just do a simple close it, take it off the server, and save it as a compacted copy, and put it back up and see if that helped anything. And so I scheduled this for a Friday after hours so that I would, if I ran into any problems, I would have all weekend to figure it out. And so I pulled it down, and while I had it down, I thought, I'll run a recover and see what happens. And the recover found a million errors, and not literally, but a lot more than I was expecting. And so then I panicked because it was on FileMaker server. It should have been safe, and I shouldn't have had it run into those problems. So the problems really predated putting it on FileMaker server, and we just hadn't run into any issues up to that point. So we didn't know that there was an issue. So so I immediately called Richard to let him know what was going on, because that could be for me it was a big problem. And once I saved it as once I ran a recover, it brought up I think it was 50 something problems. And the second time I ran the recover on the same file, most of those problems were resolved, and a lot of them had to do with a bunch of extra themes that were in the file that we weren't even using, the classic theme, and some other things. But the second time I ran it through, there were only 2 issues, which were 2 fields.
Yeah, and you're kind of jumping around on this, so let me back it up a little bit. So that's not. I mean, Calvin's kind of cutting to the end, a little bit of it, but the reality of this is very important to understand, is that save a. So let's talk about these 3 commands a little bit and where they fit in the world. Save a clone will create a copy of a file. Once again, to run a recover. To save a copy, or to make a clone, you have to have the local access to the FileMaker file. The file cannot be on the server, so it has to be locally here. So this file is locally on my computer here. If I go here, it's right here. You can see that. Okay, and I have a hotkey. I'm hiding all the icons on the keyboard so it's not distracting. I'm going to move Calvin down out of the way over here. And so what happens here is that you can go to File. You can say save a copy as, and let's just do a clone. Now, what the clone is all these processes are very therapeutic. They're designed to not be invasive and to do damage to a file. So a clone file removes all the data. It resets the file back to kind of like its native level of happiness. And so I created a clone over here. It's right here. This is the clone. If I open up the clone, I can double click it. You'll notice that it has, if I go into field definitions and tables here, it has zero records. There's no records in it at all. There's no indexes in it at all. There's no data in it at all. All it is literally is structure and schema, or whatever you want to call that. It's the inner guts of the FileMaker file. There's no user data that's input by user. It's also therapeutic because it resets all the ID numbers. Like every time there's a record, there's a hidden ID number for that record. You know this. It resets all this stuff, and it's very therapeutic for a clone file. Now, clone file can be very useful. It's good to have a backup copy of it, but a lot of customers want their data. So a compressed copy is kind of a similar thing, except that It doesn't zero out the file with data. It just kind of looks at it and reorganizes the data. It's kind of like if you had most people don't even have phone books anymore. The big yellow phone book, right? Now anything's Google, and they don't even use phone books. Phone books are it's like, imagine a offline version of Google would kind of be like a phone book a little bit, right? You'd have ads in it. You have address listings. You could look someone's phone number up. So yeah, it's like a paper version of Google, I guess. And so imagine that you had that. Well, imagine that the pages were getting disorganized, right? You have page number 15, but it's way down in the 100 section. The pages are not organized well. FileMaker files internally are a mass of little bits of blocks of 4K of data. That doesn't matter. What matters is that they can be organized very cleanly, or they can be a mishmash of stuff all over the place. And so FileMaker does basically a reorganization of the file. It finds all the pieces, it reorganizes them, it finds pieces it doesn't need, it removes them. That's why when you save a compressed copy of a file, it typically gets smaller because it removes unneeded space. Because it gets into a lot of technical stuff that doesn't really matter to the conversation. The conversation is, one, don't abuse a file. And if you by some chance happen to run into a file that's been abused, then this conversation is about that. Does that make sense? What happens is that we create, so you got a clone, which creates an empty file, very useful. A compressed file does basic maintenance on the file, but it doesn't remove anything. A recover file is basically kind of like an idea of doing maintenance on the file, but if it finds something it really doesn't like, it will remove it. So Claris all the time, FileMaker all the time has always said their standard information is never use a recovered file. That is basically legal boilerplate for we don't want you to use a recovered file because we don't want you to sue us. The short version of this is that it's like when you see a plastic bag on the floor and they say, warning, don't put this over your baby's head. It might kill the baby. It's like really obvious, right? That it's a recommendation not to use the file, but you might want to use the file, right? And so what they're doing is they're just generally giving you bulk recommendation. Don't put the bag over your head, right? We understand that. But sometimes the recovery can come back with a couple different variations. Like when you run a recover command, and I can do one right here so you'll see the process. So here's the file right here. In order to do a clone or save a copy, the file has to be open locally. If I'm going to do the recover command, the file has to be local but closed. I'm going to go File, Recover. I'm going to target this file right here. It's called FM starting point, the original one right here. I'm going to say select. I'm going to say specify advanced options, and I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit. The short version is that I can do, this is just a copy, right here. I've never even used this. I'm not sure even what that might do. This right here is a compacted copy. So it's a lightweight, therapeutic kind of process. This one here is a more evasive, like if it finds some cancer in there, it's going to rip it out. The problem is that the reason Clara says don't use it is because if it finds cancer in a lung, it's going to rip the entire lung out. If it finds a corrupted file, it may remove that file definition from the file entirely, okay? And you're like, well, damn, that's bad. Yeah, no kidding, but we are trying to triage a damaged file. You would never do this if you had a backup copy. If you have a backup copy of the file, we go to the backup. We don't even bother with this. So we do this when there is no backup. Okay, the question is, what about images? No user input images. If you're in layout mode, you put an image on the layout. That's part of the layout structure. That stays. If you're in browse mode, anything you would put in browse mode, you would import in browse mode. That's data that would be dumped in the clone. So hopefully that answers the question. Once again, we would never do this if we had a backup. So the reason we're doing this is because we don't have a backup. And so what we do is I normally set it on being the most aggressive possible. And it's going to scan all this stuff. It can rebuild it. This is one of the two ways to rebuild indexes, okay? The indexes are not rebuilt if you do this option right here as a general rule, okay? I guess you could do it, because Nick was having a conversation the other day about compacted copy, doing a rebuild. I think if you did it in the recover dialog here and you specified this, then it probably would rebuild the index. But normally, the save as a compacted copy, it's a reference to the option right here where you go save a copy as, and it's a compacted copy. So I think that's where Nick was getting confused the other day. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to File, Recover. I have to close the file first. I'm going to specify the file right here. I'm going to go Advanced Options once again. I'm zooming in. And so I'm going to select these options right here. I'm not going to bother with the bypass startup options because this has a way of building new layouts for itself. Build some new layouts so it doesn't trigger startup scripts and stuff like that. So this will actually build a brand new layout for it to land on, which has nothing on it. And then, of course, as part of the cleanup, you'd have to get rid of that. So I'm going to say OK. I'm going to say save it to the desktop. It'll be called recovered. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to run it. And so it's running this dialog right here. You see it's doing this stuff, doing this, tick 7, 7, 8, step, step, step. It's running this process. And depending on how big this file is, so Nick has what came up is Nick has a customer that whenever they crash their FileMaker server, they don't restore from backup. They do this. But what is the problem with this? If it finds something bad, it's going to delete if it finds cancer in the lung, then it's going to delete the lung, right? Makes sense? That sounds really bad. But if you had a backup, you might not even have cancer. You're like, well, yeah, it should remove it, except that if on a backup copy, there may not be cancer there, right? You see what I'm saying on that? I mean, does that make sense? There's nothing wrong with the file in the backup. The reason the file is damaged, there's cancer, because you crashed the file and it didn't close properly. That's the coup de grace, the knife through the heart kind of part of this, right? Very serious. Yeah, confused clone. Clone destroys entire index, strips out the data. Yeah. Truncate, yeah, it's a different conversation, but yeah, he's right about that. Hey, Chip Johnson, welcome as always. So it's still running the recover here. It's updating some data in here. It's actually a pretty big file. How big is this file? Oh, it's 380 megs, so we're going to get some real data in here. So that's useful. Once again, if you run this, it's running on a single core on the processor. If I go CPU usage, typical FileMaker, these items over here are actually doing data read write plus video sharing and all that, but the one that's chewing on the FileMaker is probably this one over here. It's a little heavier, more heavily engaged. And so it's rebuilding the index, doing this process. Then we're going to get this log file. Now what comes out of the recovery process is a log file. There's a summary, which will show you on screen. Then there'll be a log file with all the telemetry, right? All the telemetry of every little thing it checked. And on 350 megabytes, it's going to be a 50-page log file probably. But at the very bottom is that summary. So the summary is always at the bottom. The summary basically says one of two things. The file had some issues and don't use a recovered file. Or it'll say it found nothing wrong and you can use the file. Once again, that's the legal department of Claris getting in there. And I also read a blog article by someone at a major company. And they were saying, oh, yeah, never use a recovered file. And I wanted to laugh at this person who most of you would all know. It doesn't work for me. And it's just, yeah. So this is one of the two warning options you get. There were problems detected with the database. Please recruit the recover log and look at the severity. And you would say, why would you look at the severity? Because really it says the recovered file should not be used going forward. Copy the data out and move it over. That could even be bad advice right here. The trick is that what you want to do is look at this. And you say, scan this. It dropped 0 blocks. So it really didn't carve any guts out of it, at least that we can tell. It modified 2 items. This is a pretty benign report right here. This is a very benign report. I would generally have no problem using this. The ones that you worry about is where you start seeing drop blocks, a lot of damage in here. It's like the damage report, captain to engine room damage report. And the people run around literally on fire in the engine room. Okay, no bueno. This one here is like, someone's scratched a paint on the starship. Okay, we'll get out there and paint it, fix it. So, would you want to use a recover file? The answer is yes, you can. The trick is understanding that it could have invasively done something bad to the file, in which case if you start opening the file and then a field is missing or a script is missing or something is not happening anymore, you're going to have to go back and rebuild that. So the process right here is the exception to the rule where you don't have a backup. I see this process once a year, and it happened with Calvin. And Calvin kind of got in here and started talking, but what he did is he ran this report, and he got this damage report. Do you still have that damage report somewhere, Calvin, the one that you had?
I can look it up. Yes.
Why don't you look it up? When you have it on screen, we want to pop it open. And what the recovery does, it does two things. It does a lot of stuff, but from the plain English version. This is me giving you the 30 almost 1 years of experience. It reorganizes and cleans things up. So it finds things that are in the wrong place. It goes, oh, you're in the wrong place. Move you over here. And so it does some reordering, some reshuffling. It's like if you had like a bunch of index cards or some sort of physical, and you have to reorder them because they're like out of order. Like someone, it's like if you play playing cards, and you play, ever heard of a game called 52 Pickup? 52 Pickup is a joke. It's where you take the 52 playing cards and a deck of cards and you spew them through the air and they hit the floor. You scoop them all up. Now they're out of order. That's a little bit what recovery does. It scoops all the bits of data up and it reorders them, puts them back. Like all the hearts are here, all the diamonds are here, all the clubs are here, blah, blah. It reorders them back together. That is fine. We expect the recovery command to do that. It's when it finds a damaged card and it doesn't know what to do with it and it rips it out. That's where you have to be cautious about this. So Calvin came to me the other day and he showed me this list of things, and it was a laundry list. Calvin couldn't tell the difference between something serious and something minor. And it said, oh, well, it modified this and modified this and modified. Modified means it moved it around somewhere else. It was in the wrong spot. Okay, or somehow it had a count of the number of bits in there, and the count was off, so it's reorganizing that. And so the important part is that's fine. Okay, it's when it starts dropping stuff. So he gave me a damage report, and I go, well, Calvin, it cleaned all that. He was in a panic because it's like, oh, what a mess. I said, run the recover on the recovered file. Do it twice, and see what it comes back with. And it comes back with two issues. So the first one is it fixes everything it can fix pretty easily. Now, once again, we're only doing this because we don't have backup. So remember, I said that. Why would you always use a backup? Oh, we don't have a backup, so we would use this. So he runs it once. He gets this triage of stuff. And I said, it's a nightmare of stuff. Run the recovery on the recovered file and tell me it comes back with two issues. Those are the concrete things that are broke, okay, that you need to remediate. So then he says us two fields. Calvin, what was it? Two fields, or what were the two problems that were left over?
Yeah, so I've got that report up now.
Okay, why don't hang on? Let me share. Let me look at the screen. People are going to want to see this. Okay, so over here is the recovery log. It kicks this out. Okay, it kicks out corrupt, recovered. What's the difference in these two files?
So the difference is this is what's generated by FileMaker, and then to read it, I just drag and drop this into FileMaker itself.
Okay.
And it creates this recover converted. So they convert it from a .log file to a FMP12 file. That allows me to do a find.
Okay, so this word corrupt is only Calvin's name of the file. It doesn't necessarily represent corruption. Once again, if you're in front of a customer and you run around using the word corrupt and shit, all the customer doesn't hear corrupt. All they hear is that you've lit money on fire. Okay, that's what they hear. So I go easy with some of these words if you're in front of a customer, because you really don't know. So is this the first recovery then? Is this the first one here?
Yeah, so this is the first one, and when I perform the find on what the errors were, so if we just say, look at everything, most of these things have a 0 error, but we'll see a couple of these have error numbers. So here it's on this ID field. Here's one on a table, another field, and then all the rest were at the bottom. Let me do that find again. And these other items were all on they've recovered items on the layouts, so that was an issue. And then all the way at the bottom of the list of problems were the issues. Okay,
hang on, move that out of the way. Move your box here out of the Slack box there.
Slack. There we go. So all the way at the bottom, it was recovering some. It was recovering the themes and such. And then we got our summary here at the bottom.
Okay, and the summary is the same thing that we saw on screen a second ago on my screen. So it's important to understand, if you get an error message right? Like did something. The error message applies to the item directly above. It doesn't really say what it applies to, but it'll identify the item, and then it will tell you what it did. It applies to the item right above it. So the error message is not before the item, it's underneath the item. So then when you ran it a second time, do you have that one at all, or do you not have that one? Because it came back pretty minimal, right?
Yeah, I don't have it, but I do remember what was on it. It was just the 2 items at the top. So if we do another find, these 2 fields. So the 2 fields that I showed at the beginning, this ID field and then this text field. Those are the 2 issues.
And so it could not correct those. And so you went back and manually removed them and then put them back in, correct?
That's right. So I deleted them, and then I had a I had a DDR based on the file that I was able to
base elements DDR. He could see where it was connected to, right? By the way, for
updated all of those references.
By the way, I do get questions from people asking me where on my website they get base elements, and I'm like, I did a video on it. I don't make the product, right? It's like going to NBC or ABC or some online TV because you see a commercial for Ford trucks, and you want to go to the ABC's website and find out where you get the Ford truck. Yeah. So we don't make base elements. That's Goya. If you need to look that up on the internet, feel free to do that. Goya in Australia, I would just search for base elements and the word FileMaker together, and you'll find the product. But we did the DDR, which comes out of FileMaker up under the Tools menu here. Then you load that in base elements. It tells you where this stuff is connected. So when you delete it, you can't copy it and paste it because you can copy and paste the corrupted elements back into it, right? You have to delete it. I would probably delete it and then probably even create another compressed copy again and then create it again from rebuild those pieces. Once that's done, you can run the recover command and you're going to come back. I think you eventually ran it where you didn't have any issues at all, right? It couldn't find anything.
That's
really
correct.
wrong. Yeah.
After removing those 2 fields, then the recover had no issues.
So basically there's 2 issues here. I'm going to kind of minimize your screen down a little bit. So the 2 issues are, one is that recover can do serious damage to the file. One, we understand that. Claris, number 2 is Claris always says never use a recovered file, okay? Unless it finds nothing wrong with the file at all. The recover command does some maintenance on the file. That will always trigger the alert to never use it. The maintenance, if it does basic maintenance, is fine, okay? If you find a couple hardcore problem children in there, then go in and manually remove them, then run the recover again, and use the recover multiple times to see if it's starting to like what's going on. Now, someone would say, oh, no, you should always, I mean, I've actually had, if I've got this white paper that I posted the link for, and the issue with that, what basically they say is that never use a recover file. But if you want to use it, then just proceed with caution because understand that the recover could remove something important out of the file that you don't know what it is. If you read the log, it will generally tell you what field it has a problem with. Generally, my impression is it doesn't remove things, it just flags things that are broke. Does that make sense? It doesn't say, oh, I'm going to delete this field because it's bad. It just says this field is really messed up and it can't help it. It leaves it alone. Now, here's the thing. The recover command, when you get this data back, is that it'll say, nothing's wrong with the file, use it as is, or it'll say there's some damage with it, right? Don't use it at all. But you have to look at the log where it says, is it just doing maintenance or did it drop a bunch of items? And if you run the recover a second time, what happens, right? The third possibility is that the file is unrecoverable. It's so damaged it cannot be recovered, in which case you just need to start all over, right? So once again, I had this conversation about once every 12 to 18 months. Calvin had never been in the middle of this. And so Calvin did this recover and found this initial list. And he was confusing the basic maintenance that recover was doing with reorganizing, getting things straightened out, as opposed to this is a real critical error. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this from a strategic standpoint, this is the world that we live in now. It's the world that we've largely lived in for the last 20, 30 years. The rules here haven't changed too much. In the future, FileMaker is trying to export the FileMaker file schema out totally, right? Even the data to a point in XML. I was talking to the product managers, and they said that theoretically you could foresee the idea that you could do an XML export. You would see the corruption in the XML. You could remove it or use a tool to remove it, and then bring the XML back in, right? For example. So because it has to render out the entire FileMaker file as text, you could see problems. You could visually see the problems, right? And it opens a lot of doors. So this is kind of like that down the road vision. If you remember talking to Nick Orr about base elements, he talked about this new XML file, and he says it's not really ready for that yet because it's still missing some important things, but in the strategic sense of the world, it could be very useful like that. So questions along the line of save a clone, save a copy as, and recover. Right? And so that PDF, if you want to pop the PDF open and look at it, all right, so this is the file that all of you have. It's a little long-winded. It kind of gets verbose. It's based in FileMaker 10. It hasn't really changed. But the idea is that you come down here, they start talking about all this kind of stuff, and like, oh, never use it, right? But the reality is that it gives you, there's more under the hood in here than what you really need to know. But the bottom line is that it's a good conversation to have, right? It's a good read. When they start talking about like when it runs recover, it's going to do this and it's going to do this and it's do this. I'm telling you, you could read through this as fine. This don't matter, right? The rules of the road are that you shouldn't be doing this unless you have no other alternatives, right? And of course, then this is that part. He starts pontificating about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? And you kind of could read the footnotes and stuff like that. So it's like a professor writing a textbook, and then I want to scream running out of the room trying to read this. The short version of that is, if you cut down to the end of it, is that you have to look at the benefits of using this as opposed to the negatives of it, right? If this is the only copy of the FileMaker file you have and it represents substantial work, then yeah, if you can get through a recovery of it, get the data fixed and set, then you can use it. You should, use it. If you try to use a file, it's very sketchy, it doesn't work well, it crashes, and you don't know why it's crashing, then you've got a bigger problem. That's why you have to have the backups, right? So this is so after this long conversation about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the only thing in this conversation that's relevant is integrity of the file. Confidentiality has to do with Stephen Blackwell's fairly obsessive behavior about FileMaker security, and then availability meaning running on FileMaker server. But if you're using FileMaker server with backups, this conversation should generally never be happening. So the short version is you can go through this white paper. It's pretty interesting. And of course they say, this is kind of an indicator of how badly damaged a file is. You should go to another backup copy that you have and use that. Well, if you had another backup copy, you wouldn't be running the recovery. You shouldn't be. And so what I had is once again a customer that Nick had. They don't make backups. That whenever they crash the file, if it doesn't open, they just run the recovery command on it every day. The problem is that eventually you're going to run the recover and it won't run. It'll be so badly damaged that it won't recover at all, and you're really completely out of luck. So that's kind of an important concept to understand. Dan Rosenstein, add new features, something, add a new add-on feature, something similar, export the XML. All right, so Dan, here's the problem, is that there's about a minute and a half delay. So when you say something, it's out of context. I'm not sure what part of the conversation you're referring to. So Dan says something about add new feature, does something similar, export XML. Maybe talking about the file format change, except they've been adding features for a very long time. In fact, I just got looking at some of the stuff they're planning on doing with the new FileMaker server. They're finally getting off their butts and addressing some more performance issues with the product. I'm very excited about some of the stuff I've seen in the last week. I don't know when it's going to come out. I still have to test it on ETS, etc. But they are continuing to push forward with things. So this is this PDF. I highly recommend you dig through it. I know it's out of date. But this is the error message you can run into, right? This is FP7, but yeah, so very, very, very important. So it's a little out of date. It's very long-winded, and but pontification. I think you could probably summarize it in about 5 pages or less. Would be my basic guess. What qualifies as a file format change? When the extension of the file? Yeah, I don't know why. See that, Nick. This is why we don't bring this up. Then you get everyone pivoting into that conversation. So now I have to explain this. So a file format change is the way the file is structured, physically structured, the bits of data physically structured within the file. And the way you know that there's a different file format change is when the extension on the end of it here changes. So FMP12 is a file format, a specification that Claire set up. The last file format that existed was FP7. And before that, it was FP5, and then before that, it was FP2 or 3. There was a FM, which I think was FM2, and then an FP3, and then an FP5, I think. So, once again, it's not in any way relevant to this conversation whatsoever. Zero relevance here, none. Okay, nothing in here will, because everyone here should be using at least FileMaker 12. If you're not using FileMaker 12, then you've got much bigger problems than recovery. Okay.
Yeah, it's just really good to know what to do when you run into a corruption issue and recovering that file. But obviously, you really want to use a backup, and that's the best option.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a best option for that. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that one. It's if you abuse your server, that's why we spend so much time talking about backups and using those things. This is like what happens when everything else fails. Were you doing development on this file? You had a customer doing local development. How did this happen in the first place? Do you want to admit to your sins now? What sins did you commit, Nick? Or
yes.
Not Nick, but Calvin.
So the file was originally worked on locally by the client, and he gave it to me, and I put it up on his server. And when I looked at the older backups, and ran recovers on those as far back as I could go, there were issues. So we took the latest copy and used that for the recover that we did.
Yeah. Yeah, the trick is to not panic about the recover, right? Because if you've been generally taking care of the file, you're not going to have serious damage. The ones that get scarier when it refuses to open the file at all, then you've got a real serious problem.
I did have that happen, and with a client, and I just told him, because he refused to put it. This was a different situation. They refused to put it on FileMaker server. They were sharing it between multiple computers with Dropbox. And it got to a point where the file just would not open. And
I'm assuming this is not our customer, because they're not currently a customer. Yeah, I mean, that's what happens. We run into people who, I mean, this is like, and to Nick's credit about stuff, and I know Nick feels like I am probably picking on him, which I am a little bit. I'm trying to train him. I got to train Nick how to train. But the issue that Nick is that customers, like Nick said, you're hurting the laws of physics, or you're hurting Mother Nature. There are. It's like we had this customer, and the CEO reached out to us again the other day, but then he just disappeared. I'm not going to get into who it was, but there's a pretty big company, and his IT team is kind of running wild, and the IT team doesn't necessarily like FileMaker, so having it fail is okay with them, and they're the ones that refuse to restore from a backup when their stuff crashes, and they just start the server all over again, and if it doesn't work, they run the recover. And Nick was very, very forceful, a little heavier handed than I would say in an email, but he said, basically, if you keep doing this, you're going to lose your investment, you're going to lose your data. And they said, oh, you can't threaten us, right? And we're like, I'm not threatening you. It's not like we're going to go down there and pull guns and shoot your database. That you're dealing with the laws of physics, right? If you set yourself on fire, you might die. You will definitely be in pain, but you might die. Oh, don't threaten us with fire with our FileMaker file. Whatever, play with matches. Give your matches to your 2-year-old, set him on fire. Whatever. The point is that it's physics. And if you want to violate the laws of physics, then Mother Nature will come and destroy you. Okay? And so when Nick said that in a very fairly heavy-handed way, they got offended and said, he's threatening us. I'm like, no, man, it's just the way it is. And so they got mad and left. To be honest with you, if we have a customer that doesn't want to back up their file and take care of the file, and they don't want to listen, they can go work for another consultancy, hire them. I don't want to be anywhere near people who who want to break the laws of physics, because physics is not a negotiation, right? It's like everything's like, so the art of the negotiation, right? The best deal, right? And so it's a negotiable. No, physics are not negotiable. Setting yourself on fire. I would like to negotiate that if I set myself on fire, I won't be in any pain and I won't die. No, it's Mother Nature. It's physics, right? There's no negotiating with that. I want to negotiate with math. 2 + 2 is not 4. Okay, right? It's just the way that is. So anyway, we do run into those people, and they really don't need to be a customer of mine, because what's going to happen? They're going to blow up, and then they're going to say, "You didn't warn us." Yeah, like TK55678. So why Miron? What do you make of the entry in the curve file where it has 0 Droxdot and 31 strand layer objects? Okay, I want to talk about that tomorrow. Why Miron? But that's a great question for tomorrow. We're out of time today. Can you come? Why Miron? Can you come tomorrow? Are you going to be here tomorrow? Can you come tomorrow? Because we're going to get into the topic of structural defects. Structural defects is a word. We're going to cover structural defects. And they're herding cats across the wild. It's really great. But yeah, there's a little bit of a story in this, and understanding how you get to the end is important. So it's a foreign concept, but there are a thing called structural defects. We'll talk about these tomorrow. But there are, when FileMaker engineers build a product and they wrote this code that's building your file. So you're defining fields. So say TK55678 or Scott or Dave's in there. They're working on the file, and they define a bunch of fields, and they do this and do that and do this and that, and then they add a container. They add some data. There have been bugs over the years where the FileMaker engineers, as they're saving data to the file, they have a bug in that process. There's a bug in that process. And so it's almost like then they come out with FileMaker. They go from FileMaker 9 to 10 or 14 to 15 or 17 to 19 or whatever it is. And they know about that bug, so they write some code in there to kind of go in there and to find it and to deal with it. However, there are times where they save data into the file, and due to some certain circumstances, they don't know where the data goes. It's like you put a data, like I can go to a database I have. It originates back to 1991, 92. And I have always upgraded and updated themes. I didn't rebuild it. And there are still structural defects in it from 30 years ago. And it's an icon of Calvin and Hobbes, as in not my Calvin, but the Calvin cartoon and Hobbes. They're in the database. And so we'll see if I can pop that out and show that to you, but those are structural defects. So what happens is Clarisys builds around them. Yeah, come back tomorrow, we'll play with structural defects, but that's important. All of you need to know about this stuff. If you're a beginning person, don't let it freak you out. Don't let it freak you out. It's very, very, very important. So come back tomorrow. We'll cover the recover command. So that's about it. I appreciate everyone there. And Calvin, thank you for coming. If you're around tomorrow, feel free to come back and talk more to us. Yes, Calvin?
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Guys just stepped up the whole way. Calm, cool, collected. The quarterback, great read, good patience. More importantly, great job up front protecting this quarterback to give you a chance. And that's all you can ask for.
Try to rally down 10. 9:25 to go here in the fourth. Short motion by Amendola from the left. Brady takes the shotgun snap, stands in, throws it left for Amendola, reaches up and stacks a high throw and lands inside the 10, rolling to the 9. Ball slightly behind him, but Danny makes the grab.